welcome to our fifth installment of Ask a Chef, a series brought to you by Prairie Food Co-op and Culinary Confidante. Prairie Food Co-op is a community-owned grocery store that will provide a marketplace for as much locally and sustainably produced food as possible. We are aiming to open our doors in Lombard, Illinois in the very near future. Culinary Confidante is a culinary education-based business that provides in-home coaching, cooking parties, and workshops. Together, Prairie Food Co-op and Culinary Confidante designed the Ask a Chef series in an effort to demystify the kitchen, bringing the workshop to you. Today's Ask a Chef topic is storing produce fresher for longer. And so there are a few different things I have that I will show you guys, as well as answer your questions. So if at any point you have questions, feel free to chime in and I will answer as we go. So one of the things that I like to tell people is to think of your produce as alive, because it is alive, and the fresher your produce is, the more alive it is. And so that's why when you get local produce, it will last longer and you can keep it fresher for longer. So one of the things, like I have lots of experiments happening in my window in my kitchen. So periodically I'll show you some of those. But if you ever get something that has the roots, don't cut those off. Keep those, because it's growing and it's alive. So I got this arugula about 2 weeks ago, and I stuck it in some water. It has dirt already attached to it, and it has continued to grow. I have just periodically snipped off from the outside leaves as I wanted to use them, and it's continued to grow. Periodically though, you do want to change the water, because the water can get kind of yucky and you want to prevent things from growing in it. Other than your arugula, you don't want yucky things growing. So the biggest thing though is storing your stuff in the fridge. You want to think about, first of all, certain things don't go well in the fridge. It should not be stored in the fridge, and other things definitely should be stored in the fridge. So that is a matter of moisture content, and that's really what you're trying to do when you store your produce, is control the moisture. So when you get your stuff and you bring it home, you want to wash it first and then make sure that it's dry. If you have wet stuff, it's more likely to go bad faster. So like if you've got lettuce, use a salad spinner, or blot it dry with a paper towel or something like that, or just a regular towel, and keep it dry. Then the other thing you can do is pulling up some. Okay, so the exception is if you're keeping the roots in water. So going back to keeping your stuff alive, like this is a trick that I like to grow kale in my garden, and so this is not from my garden yet, obviously, but I stick my kale in water like it's flowers, and then I put it in the fridge, and this actually will stay good for weeks, like a really long time. Again, change the water periodically, and it'll stay good for a really long time. If you have another lettuce, like other lettuces are not, it's not really practical for you to store them that way, and so you definitely want to make sure that after you wash it, you dry it, and then store it in an airtight container, because things will absorb the moisture from your refrigerator, and you don't necessarily want that. So so again, other things that you can store in water would be one of my favorites. I have scallions, And you can see these I've had in here for probably 5 weeks, maybe. Excuse me. And the roots they keep growing. If you see all those roots that are all wrapped around there, they keep growing. And then as I use them, I snip it off. Let's see if I can find a good example here. I haven't used them in a while. That's kind of why they've grown so tall they've fallen over. Here's an example of one. So that was snipped here, and you can tell it was snipped here. And then if you get these dry papery things, just peel those off. You don't want to eat those. But if I was going to use some of these, I would just snip it down to maybe here and then stick it back in the water. I have mine in my window in my kitchen so that the sun is hitting it. And then again, periodically, every 2-3 days, change out this water. You'll notice it gets kind of yucky. Like this water needs to be changed. I'm going to change this water today. And yeah, again, I've had how many scallions in here? Like 6 or 7 scallions I've had for 5 weeks or something like that.
Are you noticing anything?
I'm trying to read my notes and look at this. So yeah, I might have missed a question. Do you have a question?
Question from
Yes.
Beth.
Yes.
Have you noticed any taste difference when you regrow them in water?
I don't think so. Taste difference, I mean, what do you think? You eat them too. I haven't really noticed much
Honestly,
of a taste
no.
difference.
I'm just glad they're going back.
Yeah, it's really cool. Within a few days, you see it start growing again, and
It's like magic.
yeah, it's like magic. It's very cool. I do have a lot of science experiments happening in my kitchen. The other thing that I did recently was I got some celery and cut it off, and then I put some toothpicks in it, and there's not really much root happening there, but this was, again, more of an experiment. And it's regrowing. Like you can see this little guy shooting out here. And then in here, again, it is growing. Celery is growing way, way slower. I have another celery that I didn't cut all the way down. And this one, I kind of peeled away the outside of it and saved the middle. And then I actually had this going in the fridge for a while. And then it started getting yellowy, and I stuck it in my windowsill with my other stuff, and it got green again, which is cool. So obviously the sun helps these. And again, these have grown really slowly. It's not necessarily that practical to regrow celery from what I'm finding, but it's cool. I like doing these little experiments. And again, you could eat these leaves, you could cook with them. So yeah. Does it grow faster in beer? I don't know. I haven't wasted beer to try. That is a good question. So going back to talking about the moisture, I'm going to see if I can see your comments at the same time here. Okay, so another thing you could store in water like that would be asparagus. You could store it by, kind of like flowers. You can store parsley like that. You can store cilantro. I have some cilantro that lasts me a few weeks. And then another thing you can do to actually improve that is put a clear plastic bag over it, for those of you that buy those still. And that will kind of, she's making a joke because it's in a Coors Light, yeah. I get it. I should turn it this way. You could put the bag over the top and kind of create a seal, and that will keep the moisture in. And that's, yeah. But I don't cover my stuff. I've done it before. Both ways work. And then another thing would be, think about how it was when you bought it at the store. So did it come wrapped in something that had air holes? Did it come wrapped tightly in something with like a little white pad or something that absorbs the moisture? Keep that kind of thing in mind. So when you're grocery shopping too, certain things are stored in refrigerated section, and certain things are stored in just like out on the shelves. That kind of gives you an idea of the best way to store things too. Let's see. Okay, so another thing that you want to take into consideration when you are storing produce is how ripe is it? And the gas that is released by certain produce is called ethylene. Excuse me, take a drink. My mug. And certain produce will release ethylene more than others, which is helpful for like if you have produce that is not ripe and you want to ripen it. A good way to do that would be, say you have an avocado that's hard. You could put that in a bag with produce that is ripe and releasing gas. So like a banana that's ripe, or an apple that's ripe, or a tomato that's ripe. Close it in there, and the gas from the ripe fruit or vegetable will help ripen the non-ripe or the less ripe item. And that is, you want to think about that both ways too. So if you have a bunch of fruit that's really ripe, don't store it with other fruit or vegetables that you don't want to ripen quickly. So if you have a bunch of apples and you throw them in the drawer next to anything else, really, apples are a big releaser of ethylene gas, and so you're not going to want to store apples with produce that you don't want ripened. And actually, when I went to the apple orchard, the tip that they gave us was to store apples specifically in a clear plastic bag with a damp paper towel. There are non-disposable ways you can do that as well. You can use any kind of reusable bag, airtight, and then just a damp towel, and they will keep for months supposedly. But apples don't last that long in my house, personally. So the other thing that, yes, mangoes, that would be a great way to ripen a mango. So as far as like what produces ethylene, there are some items that produce more than others. Ethylene producers are going to be your apples, bananas, blueberries, cantaloupe, figs, green onions, grapes, mangoes, nectarines, peaches, pears, plums, potatoes, tomatoes. So those are items that you're going to want to store separately because they will ripen your other stuff. So if you store your potatoes and your onions together, typically your potatoes may be ripening your onions faster than you might want. So I would recommend storing those separate. And again, those don't go in the fridge. Those would be out of the fridge, which I'll talk a little bit more about what goes in the fridge and what goes out of the fridge too in just a second. I see a question. Is that why you're looking at me? What are the best practices for storing fresh sourdough bread? Well, we've been making a lot of sourdough.
Eat it.
Yeah, but we don't have to store it for that long. We eat it. That's a good question. So again, going back to moisture, if you put fresh bread in a bag, you're going to keep that moisture in, and with the sourdough, you've got the nice soft center, and then you've got the crunchy outside. If you put it in a bag, the outside's not going to stay crunchy. If you leave it out too long, it might get really hard. But again, we eat it pretty quickly. So I would say just know that if you put it in a bag, that is a safe way to store it, but your crispy, crunchy crust is not going to stay that way. But you could rejuvenate that by tossing it into the oven for a couple of minutes. That's probably what I would do. Store it in a bag, and then when you're ready to eat it, you can turn the oven on like 350, pop it in there for like 2 minutes until it's warm and kind of crunchy again. I do that with store-bought bread sometimes too. So, okay. Mint. How about mint? That is a good one. So, oh, thanks, Jerry. So freezing is best for keeping bread, but it loses quality when thawed. Yes, that is also a good way to store bread for long term if you're wanting to do that, freezing it. I would just make sure you tightly wrap it, personally, in my experience. That is what I've done.
Mint's pretty much the same as like parsley or cilantro or...
So mint is a little bit different. I'm gonna Google that right now because I'm curious. I want to tell you a story like basil. Yeah, okay. So that's what I thought. So a lot of herbs. Again, you want to clean them. You want to make sure that they are dry, and then a good way to store those is you can, two things. Again, like I talked about, you can put them in water. And actually, I have stored mint in my fridge in water with a plastic bag over it, and that lasted quite a while. Another way you can do it though is in an herb roll. So either a paper towel or a regular towel. After you've cleaned it, dried it, lay it out, and gently roll it up. That will absorb the moisture and keep it from getting soggy. Personally, I like the in water method, storing things like it's fresh, alive stuff, because it is, ideally. So, okay. We talked about
in fridge, out of fridge.
Yes, in the fridge and out of the fridge. So, and one more thing too about, so within fridge and out of the fridge. That's a common question. What goes in the fridge and what doesn't? A good way to think about it is, first of all, how ripe is it? Is this something that is going to go bad quickly? If it is, put it in the fridge. Because what happens when it's in the fridge is it kind of slows down the ripening process. And so you can use the fridge for items that normally wouldn't go in the fridge. But like, for an example, let's say we have an avocado. I bring it home from the store. It's hard. I'm not going to put it in the fridge because it's going to take a lot longer for it to get soft. I would put it probably next to something ripe. I have like a basket where I store my bananas away from everything else. I would probably toss it in there with the bananas. It would help it ripen. If it got really ripe and I wasn't ready to eat it, at that point I would put it in the fridge. The other thing is, once you cut into something, always put it in the fridge, because then you have a damp environment, and outside of the fridge it's a damp, warm, moist, damp and moist, same thing, but bacteria can grow there very easily, and that is not something that you want. So, for example, tomatoes. Tomatoes do not store well in the fridge. They become mealy, they kind of break down. Always store those. Ideally, you store them like not touching each other. You would need a lot of space to do this. I usually put them in a bowl. But the best way is to store them so that they're not touching each other, outside of the fridge. And then once you cut into that and you want to save it, then it goes into the fridge. Okay, so I've got a little tangent there. But, okay, other things that don't go in the fridge. Cucumber actually is a good one to store out in the counter. It prefers room temperature. And potatoes, which we mentioned, garlic, onions, those should all be stored in a cool, dry, dark place if you've got it. And then squash depends on the variety. If you've got winter squash, which would be your hard varieties that have a hard outer shell. So, like I've got a butternut squash. This has a hard outer skin. Versus a zucchini would be a summer squash. This is softer, goes in your pantry, and this will keep much longer than this will. So you could, keep this probably for 2 months, maybe more, depending. Whereas this is more perishable. This is going to go bad faster. The skin is much thinner. This is something you're going to always want to put in the fridge. Question from Jerry. Do I have to wash and or peel organic carrots? Does the same apply to potatoes? Yes, wash. Always wash. Always wash everything. You don't know where it's been, especially now, safety purposes. You want to wash away bacteria. You want to wash away dirt. It's different if you're eating the dirt from your own garden versus mystery dirt. You don't know where it came from, because actually dirt is what, your fruits and your vegetables get all of their nutrients from the dirt. So dirt is not a bad thing. It's just that you don't know where that stuff has been, most likely. And as far as peeling, if you don't want to peel it, you can just give it a good scrub. You don't have to peel things. You can eat it. There's more fiber in the skin. Some people will say that carrots, the skin has a more bitter flavor. It does get a little more wrinkly when you cook it. It's not as appealing aesthetically. Really, it's just personal preference. I usually peel carrots. I usually don't peel potatoes. That's just my personal preference. But I would say make sure that you scrub those with a brush, because those are root veggies. They're in the dirt. They're dirty. So. And okay, so we talked about the things that are out of the fridge. Things that you want to store in the fridge would be your mushrooms. Those are best stored in a paper bag, or the original container, but take off that plastic, because again, thinking about moisture, that plastic is going to hold in the moisture, and then you're going to more likely end up with soggy mushrooms, if you've ever noticed that happening, if you just bring them home and then throw them in your produce drawer and they get like mushy. So a brown paper bag is a great way to store those, or just take away the plastic. Again, we talked about summer squash, that goes in the fridge. Fruit, that goes in the fridge. And then unless you're wanting to ripen it, and not bananas stay out. Because bananas don't like the fridge. They will get blackened. And
you mentioned earlier that when you purchase the produce, you kind of want to pay attention to how you purchase it.
Yes.
If you purchase it in the refrigerated section, maybe you want to keep it in the fridge.
Yes.
Kind of same rules apply.
Yeah. So if you're not sure where to store something, you watch this whole thing and then you forget everything immediately. Totally fine. Think about where it was when you bought it at the store. Was it refrigerated? What kind of container was it in? And try to mimic how they store it at the grocery store, because that is obviously how they are trying to keep it freshest for longest. And yeah, so you can apply that. I use canned tuna. Susie.
Did you see the mushroom stems?
Oh, yeah. So can I use mushroom stems? Absolutely, you can use mushroom stems. You can chop those up. Again, just clean them and chop them up. You can use them just like you would use the caps of the mushrooms. Good way to do that is, one of the things we used to do in school was, if you're making stuffed mushrooms, pop off the stems. You can dice that up with carrot, celery, onions, some spices, stuff it in there with the stems in there, because the mushroom stems have just as much flavor. How do I use canned tuna, Susie? This is not a canned tuna show. We're talking about produce today.
We'll message you separately.
Yeah. You can email me about that one later. Okay, so again, in the fridge, going back to, I was talking about fruit a little bit. Do I have to wash my melons and avocados and things when I don't eat the outside of it? Some people don't, and I'm going to tell you that you should, absolutely, because when you take your knife and you cut into something, let's say, and most people wash apples, but you cut into this, you are taking your knife and you are introducing whatever is on the outside into the inside of there. So if you are cutting, like a watermelon, a lot of people may not wash a watermelon. I don't eat the rind, so why do I have to wash the rind? Every time you cut, you're introducing dirt and stuff into there. And so absolutely make sure you wash all of that stuff, especially now, wash everything. And okay.
See the next question? Or did something happen?
No, I have all these windows happening in front of me. I'm not used to it. I belong in my kitchen, not in front of the computer. Okay, oranges and apples are not refrigerated at the store. Should they still go in the fridge? That is a very good point. So oranges and apples, you can store those at room temperature. However, they will ripen much faster. So if you ever see like the pretty bowl of lemons or fruit out, at people's houses, or you store your stuff like that because it's pretty, and your stuff's going to go bad so much faster, especially if you have those ethylene producers. If you've got your tomatoes in there and you've got apples in there, those are going to be ripening all that other stuff, and then you're going to end up potentially losing more produce a lot faster. So I would store those items in the fridge unless it's something that you want to ripen faster, then leave it out. That was a good question. And same thing goes for like root spices like ginger or turmeric. Those you want to keep in the fridge also. Also, citrus tip, if you're wanting to juice like a lemon or a lime, it's going to be much easier to juice if it's at a warmer temperature. So maybe take it out earlier in the day, or some people even microwave it. I don't know that I would do that, but you're going to get juice out of it easier if it's warmer. And also, if you are wanting to store citrus, maybe you have a whole bunch of citrus and there's no way you're going to go through it. As far as lemons and limes, one of the things that I like to do is cut off the outside of it. So I would cut the ends, and then you have your flat end. Then I would cut around and cut off all the peel, toss it into a blender. And you can do this with lemons and limes, but I would do it separately. And then you can store it in little mini ice cube trays. You could freeze it, and I do a teaspoon at a time. And then once it's frozen, you can pop it out and put it into a Ziploc baggie. This will keep for months this way. And then when you have a recipe that calls for a teaspoon of fresh lemon, then you just pop out one of these nice little lemons. And actually this is the little container I got from IKEA, silicone tray. I just measure a teaspoon in here, and then I pop them out, I store them in here, and then when it's time to cook, I just throw that in there. You can use any type of ice cube tray. It doesn't have to be silicone or anything like that. And it makes your cooking easier. You don't lose your produce. So that's something that I definitely like to do. And you could even toss that into a beverage if you wanted to have some lime or lemon. Really, you can use it for anything. And I do pop out like the larger seeds when I'm blending it if they don't blend up. Like I throw it all in the blender, and as I'm measuring it out, if there's big pieces, then I'll get rid of those. So yeah, you don't have to save those. So one thing you want to make sure you do is prioritize your stuff. The softer it is, the sooner you're going to want to use it. So if you've got, delicate lettuces, you're going to want to use those before you're using your hardy lettuce. So if you've got kale, that's going to last longer. And that will help you not waste also, if you think about using the softer stuff first. Also, I know a lot of people are probably buying a lot of extra stuff right now, and so one of the tips that I would say is keep in mind, allow room for things to breathe in your fridge. Don't come home and then stuff it all into the drawer so that it's jam-packed, because there's not going to be room for air to circulate around it, because you want things to be able to breathe. You want it to stay dry. If it's too smushed together, there's going to be room for moisture to happen, and mold loves moisture, and so if you need to not store everything in those drawers, just make sure you're not storing it in the coldest part of your fridge. That's typically the top of the fridge, because that's the cold air will get pumped into your fridge, and then it'll kind of fall down because heat rises. And so you don't want to keep that real delicate stuff like your lettuces right on the top in front of that ice cold thing, because they might freeze, and then you're going to lose produce that way. So yes, you want to make sure that it's got breathing room, your cold spots in your fridge. And if you still don't have room because you bought so much, or maybe you're part of like a CSA or something like that, and you get a lot at once. How do you store it when you have too much stuff? Well, maybe your fridge is full. A good way to store stuff too is in the freezer, and there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can either cook with it and then store the food that you've cooked. Like you want to make mashed potatoes, that's probably what I would do with potatoes. But if, say you don't want to cook something, I would cut it up, and then if it's a vegetable, a good idea is to blanch it. So get some boiling water going, just submerge it for like 30 seconds, and then that blanching it is going to keep that bright color. It's going to help keep the texture, and so like green beans or broccoli, those would be things that you could blanch and save. As far as fruits, don't worry about blanching them, but one thing you do want to keep in mind is if you're going to freeze little pieces, get a tray and then freeze them, spread them out individually, freeze them that way. Then once they're frozen, put them all together in a bag or a container and then freeze them. Because if you chop, say you've got fresh blueberries, you throw them all into a freezer bag or something and then freeze them, you're going to have a big frozen brick of blueberries. You want to spread them out, freeze them all first. That is why you, if you have something frozen, like I'm thinking of nuggets or like tater tots or something like that, when you pull it out, they're individual. It's not one big brick. It's because it's individually frozen and then put in a bag. Do we have a stock question? Is that what I see?
No.
Okay, for our stock connoisseurs, question: do you save some veggie scraps to use later, like maybe for a stock? That is a great idea, Jerry. Definitely, you can definitely do that. Because there are parts of produce that's edible that you may not eat because it's not pretty. You can definitely throw those into a stack, whether it's the peels or like the ends of onions that you don't want to eat, things like that. Bottom of the celery, definitely. Or you can compost those. That would be another use for those. Yes, we are going over on time. I have a couple more takeaways and then we'll be wrapping it up. A couple more ideas for when it still won't fit in your fridge. You can use herbs like parsley, cilantro, things like that, and throw them into different things. Blend them up and make a pesto. You can make a chimichurri. You could, if you've got kale or something like that, throw it into a smoothie. You could also make a spice mixture and then freeze it in cubes, kind of like I showed you with the lemon. We do that with sofrito, and then we just pop that out when we want to make rice. And that is another way to store herbs, because I know, doing the stand-up method takes up a lot of space. Like I have this in my fridge. This takes up a lot of space. I actually just received a delivery today with like 2 more bunches of kale like this. So now I have to go figure out how I'm gonna fit all of that into my fridge because I'm not gonna put it all in there like that. So you can freeze it. Another thing you can do is, if you're familiar with canning, you could can. You can bake with, like if you get a lot of fruit, bake with it. Pre-make things, then freeze them. You could make a stew or a chili, freeze that for later. Then you've got dinner or whatever meal another time. You could also dry herbs. I know you can dry them out in the microwave. You don't have a microwave, you can use an oven. Other thing you can do is give it away. Give it to somebody that doesn't have any, and they will be grateful for you. So I covered a lot. If I missed anything specific, feel free to ask. But I think I gave you guys a lot of information, and I think that just about covers everything that I wanted to talk to you guys about today. And I want to thank you guys for joining us. I lost my other pages here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so yeah, I had a lot of fun obviously talking about produce today, and if there's a question that you think of later that I didn't answer, feel free to shoot me a message. You can reach out through Facebook on Culinary Confidante page or Prairie Food Co-op's page. Myself or somebody will get back to you as soon as we can. If there's a topic that you would like us to cover on one of our upcoming Ask a Chefs, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to either comment on this video or send us a message with your idea. And don't forget to follow Prairie Food Co-op and Culinary Confidante for more content like this. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope that you learned something.